All right, so what inspired this talk? There was a recent balloon launch at the Copernic Observatory in Binghamton, and I volunteered myself to go help them. The local hams there were really engaged in the balloon launch, which was pretty cool. They were on the repeater and they were helping us navigate while we were driving around. The people who organized the balloon launch down there really only speak APRS. They're not familiar with some of the other tracking protocols that we use for balloons nowadays. And so their balloon had basically the payload from what I would consider 10 years ago, which is an APRS tracker and a spot tracker as backup. So I volunteered to add a couple of the trackers that a lot of the more modern ballooning people are using, the Horus binary trackers. Jules is sitting out there because she's got a headache today and kind of over, so she's good out there. So I provided a couple of Horus binary trackers and suggested that they use SondHub, which is sort of the more modern balloon tracking website, which I'll be demonstrating here a little bit. By the end of it, they were convinced. They started using SondHub in the middle of the balloon launch because they realized how much value it would be adding to them rather than looking at APRS.fi. And so I just wanted to share some of what went on with that balloon launch, a little bit about the launch itself, and then some of the things and why people are using that new modern technology, and then put in a plug to see if I could get anybody to help out. We've got a balloon launch coming with Cornell probably the end of this month. So
is Spot the satellite?
Spot is they're a satellite tracking device that basically like once every 10 minutes puts up its location. And like they use them with hikers and things who are going to remote locations.
Yeah, that's right.
A lot of people put them in balloon payloads. The issue with Spots is that the device itself has to be facing the sky. And it also doesn't work above about 12,000 feet. So as a balloon tracker, it's useful to find the balloon after it lands, if it lands upright. But in many cases, that saves the day because they land somewhere without APRS coverage and they have no idea where it ended up. And so that saves them. So SondHub has some advantages over APRS.fi. Is everybody familiar with APRS.fi? They've been on the website and seen it, right? So you can see a lot of stuff, all weather stations. I mean, a lot of stuff on APRS.fi. But if there's a balloon going by, you'll see a little balloon icon. Knowing what altitude that balloon is at, not easy unless you go look at the raw packet data because it's literally in a comment field. Same with any other telemetry. It's a comment in APRS. And the comment is freeform, so not predictable. There's a lot of other stuff on the map. So many weather stations. And it can show you the location of chase vehicles if they happen to be beaconing APRS, which is useful. Versus SondHub. SondHub is designed for balloon chasing. So it's only going to have balloons and chase vehicles on the map, which helps. It'll give you not only the current location and the historical path, which APRS.fi does, but while the balloon is in flight, it is predicting where it's going to land and putting a dot on the map showing you where this thing is going. And that's really helpful if you're chasing the balloon because you don't really care where it is right now as much as you care as where do I need to be to find it when it lands. And on the sidebar for APRS or for SondHub, it's got all the telemetry data a geek like me ever wants to see. It's got the altitude, the temperatures, the battery voltages, all the kind of stuff that you want to keep track of. And it can also show chase locations, chase vehicle locations on the map. And chase vehicles don't need to have APRS in the vehicle because it's actually using an internet connection. So if you're running a web browser looking at SondHub on your web browser, you can check a little box on your web browser that says, put me on the map as a chase vehicle, which is kind of nice for people who don't have an APRS capable radio in their vehicle. Okay. So today, just as it happened as I was working on this presentation, Iowa State did a launch and they were using Horus binary. It's a little hard to see on the map because it shows yellow for whatever reason, but there's the balloon and you can see it has a parachute. When a balloon is on APRS around SondHub, it'll have either a parachute or it'll be shaped like a balloon. A balloon means it's in the air and not coming down. A parachute means it has burst and it's obviously descending. So just by looking at this, I know this balloon is on its way back down. The launch point, again, kind of hard to see, is up here. And the current location of the balloon is here. and very vague and hard to see, but right over here, there's a little yellow target on the map showing where this payload is headed. So you can see this chase vehicle on the map has already headed to where the balloon is predicted to land. So he's just waiting for it to come down. Using SondHub and another thing called Chase Mapper, which is something I can run in my vehicle, about half the balloon launches I have these days, I am watching the balloon land when it comes in, because we know where it's going to come and we're following the predictions and we can see it come in. It's really cool to actually film it coming down into the tree it always lands in. So also on this map, there are some green dots. There's a green dot way up here by, I think Iowa State is actually up here. And another green dot here, that's receive stations. And you can even see a green line that's indicating that this receive station just got a packet from it. There's a sidebar, and I'll show you some of that later, that has a list of all the receive stations that heard the payload, which is kind of cool. And obviously, if you have multiple chase vehicles, they'll all be on the map here. So let's see, I think that's everything on. So the sidebar telemetry, this is actually telemetry from a weather balloon. SondHub uses pretty much the same stuff for weather balloons and for high altitude balloons. They're different websites, but the same code. So again, we see the vertical ascent rate, 7 meters a second. We see this, the horizontal rate. So it's going 5.9 meters per second downrange, wherever it's going. You see the current altitude, 34 kilometers, is way up there. And the max altitude we've seen, which is the same. So this payload happened to be still ascending at the time. The current coordinates, and you see this little icon over here is another kind of neat thing inside SondHub, since you're viewing it in a web browser. If you're on your phone or something and you click this little icon right here, it will actually open maps.google and take you to a Google Maps. And you can say, like, give me directions, and it'll take you there, which is kind of cool. There are some buttons over here: share, Scudi, plot for weather people, and plots, which is a whole separate site, which I'll show you one screen of, which has basically all the data in a data crunching format that's really easy to read. So then down here, it's got telemetry, it's got a voltage, it's got what frequency we're receiving. This is the weather sun, so we've got the humidity, the number of satellites, the outside temperature, the model, and then a whole list of all the receive stations that happen to hear this weather balloon. And again, if you're flying a high altitude balloon, you have a list of all the stations receiving a high altitude balloon, including how strong a signal each of those stations is getting, which is also sometimes kind of interesting. You know, who's it booming into, who's it weak with, that sort of thing. Versus APRS.FI, where you open this up and all the weather stations open up and your whole browser lags. And the first thing you have to do is like log in and find the filters button to turn off all the weather stations so the website becomes usable. If you can't tell, I'm not a fan of weather stations being a default on APRS. So there's so much stuff there, it's kind of hard to see. And in fact, there are things on the map. There's not a balloon on this map, but there's so much clutter on the map, it's hard to see that there's like a car over here and a digit meter over here. So this is difficult to use at best. So again, I'm not a huge fan of APRS.FI. Although if you have chase vehicles that are using APRS, which is handy, because in this launch we had recently, we ended up in a zone with no internet service. So we were hobbled without internet, and guess what worked great out there? RF. So if we had working, we didn't. If we had working APRS beacons coming out of our cars, it would have been useful. So, you know, APRS isn't useless for balloon hunting, but it's my second choice, for sure. So the chase vehicle that we saw here on the map, that's enabled in the web browser. So if you pull down, there's a little icon of a car and you click it, it'll say chase mode. You can turn it on and just put your call sign in there, and it'll end up being your call sign _ chase. And it's just that easy to get your chase vehicle on the map if you want it there. And it's using your device, your phone, your tablet, whatever, the GPS in that device to locate where your vehicle is. And it's updating it every 30 seconds or so. So that's how chase vehicles work in SondHub. I had mentioned it's unfortunate that this, there we go. Thank you. It's unfortunate that the plots, or I'm sorry, this is the plots I gave mention to earlier. This is basically where it collects all the data. It's a site called Grafana. And if you click the plots button on the site, it'll take you to this. And this is just the first screen. You could scroll down and there's tons of charts and graphs. But for example, here's altitude. So over time, we were climbing in altitude, we burst and we came down. And you can see we come down a lot faster than we go up because the air is thin and the parachute takes a while to kick in. This is ascent descent rate, this particular flight. This was the Copernic flight. And the ascent rate was about 2.5 meters a second all the way until burst. And then you see it goes big negative because it drops like a brick when in the thin air. And then as the air thickens, you see it slows down and the parachute starts to have effect. So that's how that works. And that's plotted against the altitude. So you can see how that works. Sensor data you see in here, you have humidity, temperature sensors. This is the chart of how many satellites we're seeing. And the charts just go on and on. There's just all kinds of neat data in there. So if you're a geek like me who likes all that data, Grafana is really cool. And this data is just collected automatically for any balloon that flies. You don't have to do anything. You just go there and there it is. There's the ability to customize dashboards, which I did for the Copernic launch. And I can show that later. So meanwhile, back at the Copernic launch, let's talk about that. So what they do there is they have a workshop every summer where they have a week-long program for kids. I'm not a great judge of ages. I would guess they were between like 10 and 15 years old. And they show up for a week-long workshop at the observatory. And they spend a couple of days building a balloon payload. And then on Wednesday, they fly the balloon and ideally recover it. On Thursday, they get all the data and imagery back from the cameras, and the kids crunch the data and come up with little presentations. And then on Friday, they do little presentations about what they found. And they've been doing this for several years. And it's really, an interesting project. Some of you probably saw I emailed around before this flight because they were also flying an SSTV transmitter in that flight. So it was sending live images from the balloon payload as it was flying. And so they announced that through ARRL, and they actually had people all over the place listening. They got, and the organizer was checking his mail on his phone, and people were sending him pictures they were getting. He got them from Canada, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania. People all over were sending grabs of the pictures they were getting back on SSTV. I set up a receiver at my station. I actually had one in my car as well. Their tracking, again, was sort of tracking that I would consider 10 years ago tracking. They had a big red B APRS tracker and a spot tracker as backup. Their SSTV was running on a Raspberry Pi with a radio module. So it transmitted, I think, at 1 watt, which is plenty when you're at altitude. They also had a GoPro and I don't have it on there, and a 360 camera. They had a boom across the payload and a 360 camera on one side and a GoPro on the other. And they had a third camera, which the Raspberry Pi was using for the picture that it was sending down. I contributed a couple of Horus binary trackers that we basically just stuck on the payload string above the payload just to have additional tracking. Turned out that was very handy, and I'll tell you why. And SSTV, as I mentioned, was widely advertised and very well received. A lot of people got in touch saying they got the images, and actually ARRL headquarters had people receiving images, and they did a little video about it, posted it on Instagram. So it was kind of a fun thing.
What band was it?
It was on 70 centimeter.
Yeah. Was it? I thought it was 2 meters.
Oh, you're right. You're right. 2 meter. Sorry, 2 meter.
I got it. Went up the hill from my house and.
Yeah, it was on 2 meter. And the one unfortunate thing is it turned out they had done this before and hadn't had a problem, but this time it was on 2 meter. And of course, the big red B in there is on APRS beaconing on 2 meter. And somehow they had some cross interference. The beacons were actually getting into the Raspberry Pi and ended up messing up the modulation of the APRS. So literally you could see lines of static in the images. Even if you had perfect reception, there would be static, and that was, they figured out it was exactly when the big red B was beaconing. So they just had a problem with some RF leaking into the Pi that was making the images. So here they were filling up the balloon on the left and getting ready. This is just before launch on the right. While I was with them, since I've done like 50 launches now, I was looking at the bottom of this picture. You can see there's a gallon jug with water in it. That's a counterweight you use to basically calculate neck lift or to get your neck lift correct. And neck lift basically is how much lift after whatever you need to get the balloon off the ground. So when it's neutrally buoyant, there's 0 neck lift, and then they were going for about 2.2 grams or 2.2 kilograms of neck lift. And I looked at that and said, that looks like not enough. Usually any balloon payload I'm doing is like a full gallon jug or a gallon jug and then some. And this was a half a gallon jug. So I actually got the organizer to go in and we put all the numbers in the calculator he was using and it came out with 2.2 kilograms. So we launched it and it was not enough. And it turns out that if he had refreshed his web browser, the calculator would have worked. There was something screwed up in the calculator in his web browser and it literally gave him a number about half what it should have been, which my eyeball was saying that that jug should be full, not half empty. And so it ended up the payload was climbing at about 2.5 meters a second instead of 5 meters a second, which means instead of taking 90 minutes to get to apogee, it took 3 hours to get to apogee, which meant it was a long flight and it carried quite a bit further downrange than anticipated. So I felt bad because it's like all my inner stuff was screaming, and the minute they let go of the balloon, I looked at it and said, "Oh no, it's not enough." I could tell just looking at it, it was climbing too slowly. And I ran into my car and I brought up SoundHub and it said 2.5 meters a second ascent rate. It's like, so it's gonna be a long day. So we knew that within seconds of them letting go of the balloon. So here it is launching, and you can see the balloon. There's the parachute sort of luffing right there. Basically, when the balloon pops and all of this starts falling, this parachute opens and slows it down. This is a radar reflector. This is one of the 2 trackers I donated. We just stuck it on the payload line. Here's the other tracker I donated that we stuck on the payload line. And then here's their payload box, and you can see this boom sticking out horizontally. And this has the GoPro on one side and the 360 cam on the other. So the trouble began immediately. I had already talked about the neck lift not being enough. So it turned out to be a long flight. And basically that meant the pre-flight predictions were out the window. So where they anticipated having to drive to pick up the payload had nothing to do with where it was really going to end up. And again, the nice thing about SoundHub is SoundHub was telling us immediately where it thought it was going to end up. And it was much more accurate. Then it got worse. At burst, basically all the signals from the payload box stopped. The big red B, nothing. The spot, nothing. We didn't expect the spot till it landed because it was above 12,000 feet or whatever. But it never came back. And the SSTV stopped. And what we discovered after everything was recovered was that when the balloon pops, that's a violent event. Everything thrashes around. They didn't tape the lid of the payload box down hard enough. And the lid of the payload box popped off and it just spit all the payload right out the box. So we didn't know that till after they recovered, but that's why everything went dark. But my 2 trackers were on the payload string, and that boom with the 2 expensive $750 worth of cameras was still attached. So from right after burst, the only thing we had was the horse binary tracking, which we followed right to the ground.
Mojo,
Yeah.
if it's any constellation, the same exact thing happens to skydivers. Everything gets jostled violently.
Yes. Hopefully they don't pop out the box without a parachute. So the track. So here is the track that we had, and originally it was gonna land around here. Because it was climbing so slowly, and then it ended up going all the way practically to the Roscoe Diner, and then back this way. And the neat thing is in this time of the year, when a balloon gets above about 70 or 60,000 feet, it actually turns and flies west. So around here, it got to 60,000 feet and it flew west until it burst somewhere around here at 100,000 feet. Then it descended from 100,000 feet, still going backwards until it got to about 60,000 feet, and then it started falling in this direction again. So that's the way balloons work around here in the summer. So I looked at the predictions, and Deposit, New York is right around here where I'm wiggling the mouse. And so I said, we should just go sit and deposit. It's going to be like 2 more hours before this thing turns around and comes back. And at this point, the folks looking on APRS.fi were watching the payload go and go and go. And they're like, this thing's going to land in New York City. Don't stop. You got to go. You got to go. And I'm like, no, it's like right here. It'll come back. And sure enough, it did. So at around 60,000 feet, the guy on the repeater's like, hey, it stopped. It's coming back. And it's like, yeah, like I told you. And I kept saying, it was funny because I'm on the repeater saying, you should look at SoundHub. But APRS.FI says, you should look at SoundHub. And finally, after burst, it started going this way again. And they lost APRS completely. At which point he finally relented and looked at SoundHub. And then he understood why I said we're staying right here, because he saw it was landing just north of where we were parked for 2 hours.
Did you get any cheesecake at the Roscoe Diner?
We didn't go that far. We stopped and deposit at a Wendy's parking lot and had a spicy chicken sandwich. So this was sort of where they became sold on SoundHub, because we sat here. We didn't have to drive all the way to run and chase it all the way back and then overshoot and drive back. We knew where it was coming. And so we just sat here and deposit, and the only thing I wasn't sure about, the prediction was sort of wavering north and south. The prediction will move a little bit as it goes. And it was going north and south. So we just waited until we saw about where it was going to go, and then we hopped in the car. And about the time it came down, we would have been right under it, except there was no internet out there. So, but anyway, as we waited, this is what I had in my car. I had a tablet with my actually a Baofeng radio sitting on my dash here with an audio cable plugged into, you can just see the audio cable here, plugged into my tablet. And this right in here, you can see is an SSTV image. There's the clouds, there's the sky, there's the black space, receiving SSTV images in the car. So I was just receiving those, watching the pretty pictures. And then up here, I've got a little, just this I made for Jules, because she got sick of me almost driving off the road as I was trying to look at my phone to see what the altitude was. So I made a big old display here, 24.68 kilometers. There's the altitude on a big display on my dashboard, so I don't have to dig out my device while we're driving. So that's that there. So I just sat in the Wendy's parking lot for 2 hours and watched the SSTV. And these little things across here, one of these is probably an APRS beacon from that big red bee interfering with the outbound signal, where the images would have looked nicer. So that's where we sat in deposit waiting. So then, we're doing great following payload until we drove into the backwoods and lost internet. And the comedy of errors begins. I have a Chase computer in my car that has the capability of having offline maps, so that if the internet's not up, I still have the maps. Did I remember to download the offload maps before we started? Nope. The local navigators in their cars, we had a truck or a van full of students who were all on their phones looking at Google Maps, which went dead because there was no internet out there. The remote hams were trying to help us navigate, but as it happened in that car, my Kenwood radio APRS beaconing isn't working. Something wrong with the radio. And the other vehicles didn't have anything beaconing APRS, so they didn't know where we were. So as we're driving and I'm looking at my map, and I know my Chase computer, although it didn't really have a map, it had the balloon going across because it had the telemetry, and it had my car, and it knew how far away it was, but it had no roads. It's just like an open screen with 2 dots on it, and I'm trying to get them close to each other. So we're like, well, we're on such and such a road, and should we go right or left? Are you north or south of this? I have no idea. There was a lot of funny conversation on the repeaters. They're trying to help us navigate, but we didn't know where we were. And we were driving by so many roads so quick as we're cross streets, they couldn't keep up with where we were. And so we sort of ended up just like pulling off and saying, let's just wait till it comes down and then we'll figure out how to get there. So as it happened, I had spots coming into my Chase computer right until it was about 1,000 meters off the ground. And then we stopped receiving traffic, so we knew it was somewhere nearby. So I ended up going with the lowest common denominator. I had a Garmin on my dashboard. So I got into the Garmin, and you can enter GPS coordinates in the Garmin. So I'm looking at my Chase computer and typing in the GPS coordinates into my Garmin, and then said, go there. And the Garmin, of course, has offline maps, so it was able to take us close. And then once we got close to the final coordinates, my Chase computer started receiving the telemetry again, and I got the final coordinates in the tree, of course, of where the payload was. So, so here's me putting the stuff in the Garmin. So when we finally did get there, it was on the side of a hill up here, about 300 meters higher than we were parked. We were parked down here by this building, and it was up in these woods. And again, I had no internet. So when I brought this up on my phone originally, it was just a blank screen with 2 dots on it. And again, what I did is I went into Google Maps and I just put in destination and I typed in the numbers off my Chase computer that was receiving the telemetry. So I had two dots and a distance, but I didn't really even know which direction particularly. I had a pretty good idea. But as it turned out, this house right here, there were some contractors working next door at a new house that's not on the satellite view yet. And they knew the guy's Wi-Fi password. He had shared it with them. So they said, oh, the Wi-Fi password is this. So I got Wi-Fi long enough to get this screenshot and turn around and say, okay, that way. And so literally what we did is we walked into the woods with my phone and there's the blue dot is where I'm standing and the red dot is where we need to go. And we just walked until the blue dot and the red dot were on top of each other, which is low tech, but it worked.
Your Google Maps also has offline maps.
Oh, sure. Now you tell me. Yeah. So yeah, there was internet wasteland out there. In retrospect, the other thing I could have done is that the tracker was actually beaconing APRS on 70 centimeters well. And I've got a Kenwood D72, and if you receive APRS on the D72, it'll give you a bearing and distance to target. And so I could have pulled out my D72 and a compass, and that would have been a little more scientific than just walking around and saying, oh, I guess we got to walk 90 degrees that way. Our dots aren't converging, but we got there. That's how we found the payload. So now let's play find the payloads. One's a zoomed out picture and one is zoomed in to make it easier to find. Payload is, God, I can't even see it. It's up in here, and on this picture, it's down here. Here it is right here. So that's the orange payload box right there under my mouse. And in this picture, it's higher up. It's up here somewhere. I think it's right there. So yeah, sometimes you could be standing right under the payload and not see the payload. It was at the very top of the canopy, and these trees were over 50 feet tall. I have an arborist's throw bag. It's called a Big Shot, and it's a 6-foot long stick with a bungee cord. And we were pulling it all the way to, I had like 6 inches of handle room, and this bungee was pulled tight. I mean, scary tight. It took 3 of us to pull the bungee enough to get it on the trigger. And we put the throw bag in and I was shooting, and we spent 2 hours shooting at it. We got around every branch near it, and shook it and waggled it around, and it came down a little bit, but we never quite got around whatever we needed to get around so we could pull it down. So after 2 hours, we were baked and dehydrated and gave up. So he went back a couple weeks later and with the landowner and a chainsaw, and there's the payload and there's the remains of the tree. So, and as you look at this payload, I can't zoom in, but you can see there's, whoops. My God, what have I done? Come on, there we go. There's the payload box. He threw the radar reflector on, but you see inside of the payload box there, you shouldn't be seeing because there should be a cover. Yeah. And there's no cover and there's no stuff inside that box other than this radar reflector he tossed on top. But fortunately, here's the boom. And here's the HD or the GoPro, and over here, this is the 360 cam. So that's $750 worth of cameras right there. So that was worth recovering for sure. It took a couple weeks, but they finally got it down. So lessons learned from that flight. The local hands on the repeater were really helpful. It took me a little while to convince him to go to Sondhub. It took me about 10 times to spell Sondhub before he got to the right site. But when he got on there, he's like, "Oh, wow, this is cool." And as I said, there's value in knowing where it's going, and it's often more important than knowing where it is, especially in this case. Otherwise, we would have been driving all the way to Roscoe and back for no reason. The trackers on the payload line away from the payload was helpful because we didn't lose it with the payload. But APRS, the RF tracking in the vehicles definitely had a place and would have helped us if we had working APRS. So I'm working on getting that fixed in my vehicles because it should have worked. It didn't, and I didn't have time to test it enough before the event. So that would have helped because then the people helping us navigate, they were on the repeater and telling us turn right, turn left. If they knew where we actually were, they could have helped us because they knew where the prediction was going because they had internet. Offline maps, whether it be on the Garmin or downloaded Chase computer maps or downloaded maps, Google Maps, are essential and sort of a planning activity that one should do. And what I should have been doing while we were sitting for 2 hours in that Wendy's parking lot is downloading the maps to where the prediction was. And I just didn't get to it. And a crossband repeater can be your friend. As it happened, we're on the side of a hill with no internet coverage, but we had wonderful repeater coverage with our 50-watt radios. We couldn't hit them with 5-watt radio, but we could have stood up a crossband repeater in our cars, and we would have had contact with the support folks throughout the whole adventure. And also, just for life safety purposes, it would not have been a bad idea to have radio contact through the crossband repeater. So in fact, the organizer sent me an email today saying, you know, the second time we went out there, I set up a crossband repeater when we went up in the woods. And I said, you know, when I came home, the first thing I did is cross-train myself on how to set up a crossband repeater on my Kenwood. Because, yeah, I would have liked that. So 360 cameras are cool. This is from the flight. It was going up and a jet passed overhead. So that's the kind of footage you can get from a 360 cam. The downside is that it uses a lot of space, because when you have one of these images, you can actually pan around and look from any direction you want. And he panned around to make this image. They tested it for the expected flight duration, which was about 90 minutes up, 45 minutes down, which is typical. But this was 3 hours up. The battery died 20 minutes before the balloon burst. Or I'm sorry, no, the battery didn't die. The SD card filled up. He had a 256 gig SD card full of 3D image, 360 imagery that filled up 20 minutes before burst. So that was it. But he did catch that cool jet overfly, so that was pretty cool. So I mentioned Horus binary, so I'm going to talk about it just a little bit. It's designed for balloon tracking. It includes sort of all the telemetry that geeks like me want to have, temperatures, voltages, all that. It beacons continuously on dedicated frequencies about 20 times a second. Each beacon takes a little over a second, or like 2 seconds to do. And because it's on dedicated frequency, you don't have other people on APRS yelling at you for bogging down APRS. It does require dedicated receive stations that are listening for Horus binary. You know, unlike APRS, where we just have APRS digipeters and iGates around. But the hardware for tracker is basically free. We retask radio songs, and National Weather Service launches 2 of those a day out of Buffalo, and they rain down around Western New York, and you can just go pick them up and we can reprogram them, which is what I do. APRS has the advantage that it's ubiquitous, but if you beacon more than about once a minute, the APRS gods are going to get cranky with you. Telemetry other than coordinates and altitude are in the comment field and non-standard. So it's kind of, you know, difficult to automate processing the telemetry. It doesn't directly upload to SoundHub. It does get to SoundHub. If SoundHub sees something that has a balloon icon on it that's above some certain altitude, like 5,000 feet and climbing, it will add it to the SoundHub map. But if you're testing your APRS payload on the ground, it won't get the SoundHub automatically. So it's a little bit fussy. And with APRS, you have to buy a dedicated APRS tracker, which can cost $100 or more. So free is always better than $100 or more. So here's 2 examples of the free hardware that rains down from the sky. Buffalo launches these RS-41 trackers twice a day. And I've talked about these before. These DFM trackers are launched quite a bit to the west of us. So these come down, and both of these can be reprogrammed to use as balloon trackers. The protocol that we're using, Horus binary, is 4FSK on upper sideband, usually 70 centimeters. So it does require a sideband radio, not an FM radio on 70 centimeter. So that is a little bit of a barrier, but not too bad. You can do it if you have an SDR, a $40 cheap SDR dongle. You can even set it up and you can receive like a 50 kilohertz band pass, and we can have 8 trackers sandwiched next to each other. When I went to the super launch in Kansas 2 years ago, we had like 6 or 7 trackers running Horus binary, and we put them all 5 kilohertz apart, and with one audio pass, 50 kilohertz audio pass on an SDR, we had all the trackers coming in at once. It's pretty cool. To receive Horus binary, there's sort of three options right now. And I'll go through those. Horus Demod Lib, I'll just go through them. I'll talk about the detail. Horus Demod Lib is a Linuxy option. So this is a Raspberry Pi with an SDR plugged in the side, and this other crap you can ignore. This is a cable going through a GPS. And this is an extra little display I have on there that you wouldn't necessarily need. But a Raspberry Pi, which costs $40–50, an SDR, which is $40, for $100, you've got a receive station that can do a lot of stuff. It can do SSTV, it can do APRS, it can do RS, it can do whatever you put the software on. But it's Linux, so that's a barrier to entry for some. It doesn't have a GUI, and you don't really hear audio. What you get is a debug log file that looks like this thing down below with, received telemetry, uploaded telemetry kind of data down here. That's what I run because I'm a Linuxy kind of guy, and it works just great for me. Another option is something called Horus GUI. That's available on most platforms. It's available on Windows, Mac, or Linux, and it has a graphical interface, so you can see the signal. In fact, you can see the 4 FSK here, the 4 different frequencies, and it will decode the signal and upload the decoded telemetry to SoundHub. This in this particular example, I had my Kenwood TS2000 listening, plugged into my Signal Link, this is technology a lot of you folks probably have. And I happen to be running Linux, but it could be going into Windows or whatever. And there it is running the application, downloading the telemetry and uploading that. And then finally, the third is the low budget option. And that's Web Horus. One of the developers who does all the cool Project Horus stuff actually wrote an application in JavaScript that will run in your Chrome browser and decode Horus binary. So I have my $25 Quansheng radio with, there's public domain firmware that you can put on it that will allow it to listen on sideband. So I'm running modified firmware on this that does sideband. And it's receiving this telemetry. I'm pumping it through an audio cable. There's a little USB cable that goes into the audio port. And there's, down here, there's also a little just adapter because it comes out at 2.5 millimeter or 3.5 millimeter. And I have to adapt it down to 2.5 millimeter for the microphone input or speaker output, I'm sorry. And so it's just listening and decoding the packets on my tablet. This also works on a phone. And I just put it on a tablet so it's bigger to see. And again, you can see the 4 peaks there for the 4 FSK, and this is uploading telemetry to SoundHub. So this whole solution is a $28 Quansheng, a $14, and a $4 cable, plus whatever your favorite device is that will run a web browser. So not a high barrier to entry for doing Horus binary. And again, this exact same setup could be used to receive the SSTV that we received for Copernic. It could be used to receive APRS. So that's not wasted hardware by any means. So there was a couple options if anybody's interested in listening to Horus binary, because we have an upcoming launch. Space Systems Design Studio is planning another launch. It's a reprise of a launch they did a few years ago. I have a 7-minute video. I don't know if anybody feels like watching a 7-minute video, but maybe I'll fast forward through it just to get to the cool part, because there is a cool part. So they're all about the design studio and all the experiments they did up to date, and then finally they get to the launch, the payload deployment, and the objective of this mission was that right there. They wanted to simulate a payload, a CubeSat, ejecting a solar sail. And the objective of this mission is from the ISS. They're going to release a CubeSat that's going to release the solar sail, and they want to experiment with solar sails as a way to travel in space. And so they wanted to simulate this with a balloon to see what it would look like, visualize what it would look like to eject a solar sail from a payload. And so we helped them with that. So for this experiment, they did it with a foam payload box. They want to redo it this year at the end of this month using an actual CubeSat size package to demonstrate that it still works for what they intend to send to the ISS. So here's sort of the end of that flight. Time to get to it. Again, 360 cam coverage is always cool. the eject and that'll slow it down. And it was on a tether, so they didn't lose the sail. So it's just hanging on a string there, and we'll collect it when we retrieve the payload. Here's the balloon burst, which is always violent, and that's why that payload from Copernic lost its lid. You can see how violent that is before the parachute gets hold. Anyway, that's the idea of the experiment that they want to reprise at the end of this month. And so we'll be launching that, and we'll be having forest binary trackers on that payload. And I invite you, anybody who's interested, to help track it, to be on repeaters, to help us navigate in the off chance that we end up going somewhere strange to recover it. Oops.
You didn't mention the Mestastic.
Oh yeah, they did have Mestastic on the Copernic balloon too.
Yeah, Mestastic is on the spectrum of 900 megahertz, a fraction of a watt. And I received one ping from the satellite from 80 miles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. You know, these balloons, I mean, we're sending our tracking signals at 100 milliwatts or 50 milliwatts, and it's heard for 300 miles. You know, once it's in the air, you get amazing range. So if you're interested in setting up a Horus binary station, or you're interested in like hanging at home next to a web browser and a repeater to help us with navigation, because when I'm driving, Jules can't look at the screen and navigate at the same time. She gets car sick. So that's where I'm doing the distracted driving and looking at telemetry and balloons and navigating and driving all at the same time. It's not good. It's really not good. So I really appreciated the hams in Binghamton chip it in to help. And, you know, if you want an armchair quarterback from home and help us out, that would be much appreciated. So let me know. Any questions? Yeah.
So none of the students volunteered to climb the tree?
None of the students were permitted to try and volunteer to climb the tree.
Okay.
Yeah, I know they're younger and bouncier than we are, but yeah, it's not a good idea.
As a former pilot, I have to wonder if air traffic control knows where this balloon is. It has a radar reflector on it, but it's pretty small.
Copernic did call in a NOTAM for the flight, which was off by quite a bit because they didn't predict it well. But pretty much for the NOTAM, they want to know when it's released and when it lands. They don't care very much more than that. As it happens, this payload was exempt from FAA Part 101 because it was under 12 pounds. Part 101 for FAA, if the entire payload is under 12 pounds and every payload box on the string is under 6 pounds, you don't even have to file a NOTAM. I've had enough trouble calling in NOTAMs that I don't bother. They make it very clear they don't want me to call them.
They don't see it on radar.
What's that?
They don't see it on radar.
They don't see it on radar. And the FAA has made it abundantly clear they don't care when I call, so I don't call anymore.
And that's a little disturbing, actually. I think.
Yeah, as a pilot, you should.
Flying into
But yeah, the FAA makes it a pain in the butt.
But
When I spent a week and multiple phone calls and emails coordinating with the FAA before a launch that we did with a bunch of Boy Scouts, and they said, okay, just call us and let us know when you launch it. And I called them on the day with 50 Boy Scouts standing there, and they had no idea what I was talking about. And I had to go through all the information again. And the camp counselors were having the kids sing songs and stuff because they were getting bored and impatient. And I got done and I hung up the phone and I said, I'm not doing this again. So as long as my payload's exempt, I'm not calling them. They made it abundantly clear to me that they didn't want my information. So sorry, pet peeve. Yes.
I've got a slightly different take on the balloon thing. This is all fascinating because it just the intersection of so many different technologies and getting the software and all of the stuff to play nicely together is is amazing. Little piece of engineering. I was talking on HFAM to somebody that launched a balloon. And it was, I believe he said, a 5-foot balloon that he inflated to 3 feet. And he had solar power, no batteries, so it went dark at night. And using fishing line and fine wire, he somehow managed to create a vertical, full-size 20-meter dipole. And put in a little transmitter for 20 and 30 meters and track the thing using Whisper.
Yep.
It's made a complete circuit and went on, and it's now over Spain somewhere on its second revolution.
Yeah, I've done those. I've circumnavigated one using a couple of party balloons, 36-inch party balloons. I've designed a tracker and it's solar powered using Whisper. I circumnavigated one myself, using my own stuff because it's about $50 an attempt. It took me a lot of attempts. So started getting like, okay, I circumnavigated, I can check the box, I'm done. But I did help Pittsford schools. They did a circumnavigation using the same tracker. I actually packed up all my gear, surface mount soldering. We built the trackers with the kids, and flew one. And one of their flights went around the world, I think about 8 times. And yeah, circumnavigated 8 times. Unfortunately, it was, I mean, they launched it like a week or 2 before the end of classes. So the kids, unless they were following along on Instagram or something, they didn't really get to enjoy watching the telemetry every day. But that thing was in the air for months and circumnavigated multiple times. So that was the most successful with one of my trackers.
How many of these balloons are running around the air?
Well, you'd be surprised.
I think maybe I would be.
Let me bring up my web browser because I happened to be looking at this just the other day and saw how many were in the air. So if I go to the amateur.soundgov.org, this is going to basically show all the balloons that are in the air, and there's a ton of picos. So in the last 12 hours, the whole, you can tell these ones with really long tracks, these are obviously pico balloons, and it'll be something around 12,000 to 14,000 kilometers. So 13.5 kilometers, so these are floaters. So, you know, they're flying at 13.5 kilometers and they'll just beacon all day long and they just go round and round. And so these are pretty much all pico balloons that people have launched. It's become quite a thing. When I did it, there were only, I think I was about the 6th or 7th person ever to circumnavigate. And now there's a commercial guy in Australia who sells pico trackers. And so people just buy them and put up balloons and launch. So you turn it into a commercial thing, which is also why I'm less interested in it now. But yeah, lots of people fly them. It's fascinating to watch the telemetry and see where they go, and they just get caught in trade winds and just go round and round. It's fun. Any other questions?
How much of a footprint on the ground has line of sight to this?
Well, with line of sight with a high altitude balloon, which will go up to about 100,000 feet, you'll have a 150-mile radius, maybe 200-mile radius. You know, when I'm at apogee, when the flight we had with Copernic was near apogee, there were some receive stations down around DC that received it. And that's just line of sight, 70 centimeter, 50 milliwatts. These pico balloons are flying half that height. So line of sight, they're only hearable for maybe a 7,500 mile radius. However, they're using, most of them are using HF and using Whisper. So they'll get reflection and be heard for thousands of miles, which is the cool thing about using Whisper for that. So the balloons will be heard all over the world. And that's nice too, because yeah, there's no receive stations within 75 miles of this balloon in the middle of the Pacific, but that's being heard because it's using Whisper.
The station in DC, they use non-directional antennas, I gather.
Yeah, I mean, he just had a probably a dipole on his roof or something, and he was just listening. There's some guys down in DC who launch a lot of pseudo pico balloons using Horus binary. And so he had a receive station, and I've actually coordinated with those guys, so we're all using the same frequencies. So he'll hear mine and I'll hear his. Alrighty, well, thanks everybody. Hope that was interesting.